recording now.
Sweet. Let me just get this set up. Perfect. Okay. Welcome back, Carl. Happy New Year and all that. And how you doing?
Happy New Year. Yeah, I'm not doing too bad. I had flu most of Christmas, but I'm on the other
Mm.
side now, ready to just enjoy some sweet, sweet Premier League action.
Sweet, sweet Premier League action. Yeah. And I'm sure plenty of people who are listening to this, such as the bombardment of kind of like podcasts or content in general that's t telling you about what you should do for the new year and how you should, kick some bad habits, adopt some good ones. What can you do to improve yourself? So this is a time of year, right, where people look back at last year and oh, that didn't go so well, that went well. And so I'm going to ask you a little bit because I know that there was a piece by yourself that came out yesterday for The Athletic that was attempting to review Man United's 2024, and I think you even admitted pretty early on in the piece that to do so concisely was going to be really difficult to do. Things have probably changed since you actually wrote that piece as well. So I'm going to give you the chance just to, when we last spoke, it was actually ahead of the season, I think it was, or ahead of the
Hmm.
first time United played Liverpool. And you had lots of questions, more questions than answers, I think, was your one of the phrases you mentioned. Recruitment, the backing of the manager, the plan was something that came up time and time again. If I ask you to do that impossible task and concisely sum up the past 12 months and some of the key themes, where would you, where would we begin?
That's a really good question. Where would we begin? I suppose we would start with the departed manager, Eric Ten Hag.
Sure.
We would start by essentially going, what was he attempting to do? And you go, what was he attempting to do? Then you go, why was he attempting to do it? And then you go, why was it not successful? Um, then- and then you go, well, what happens next? And blah 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 blah. I think the best way to describe Manchester United succinctly is to say the most succinct explanation of Manchester United and how they played in 2024 was given by Arne Slot after Liverpool's 3-0 win. And I think that was to outsiders, that was quite shocking how matter of factly he explained things after that 3-0 victory. To quite a few um, more tactically minded people going about Manchester United business on a week to week basis. Slot's post match interview to Roy Keane and everyone else was just a well, he said it now. And that fixture, I think I previewed it two or three times. Even at the start of the season, I said, that fixture was really, really dangerous because there was always the point. I said, even if Manchester United don't get a victory, there was always that weird comparison that if Liverpool even got a draw, there was going to be another Dutchman with a similar haircut who is, even before you get into the tactical prowess and whatnot, Arne Slot's command of English and Arne Slot's press conference demeanor. Eric Ten Hag was always going to run the risk of not getting a good result in that game, and then everyone going, wait a minute, did Manchester United hire the wrong Dutchman? So on and so forth. Now, of course, things are a little bit more complicated than that. But at least in that moment, you saw it very, very clearly. One Dutch manager on the ascendancy who had managed to retweak and balance the squad. Um, Perhaps they didn't need too much retweaking and balancing, but getting it to work in a way that now is at the top of the league, top of the Champions League as well. And another Dutch manager who, when they both were leaving the Netherlands, were regarded as neck and neck, but now might take a while before he gets a top job. So, so that's 2024 very, very succinctly. Manchester United being incredibly chaotic, and in the end, it took one of their biggest rivals to go, "Here's your problem." And then 2025 now is what can Ruben Amorim do to solve that problem, as well as a number of other inherited problems that have manifested themselves over a very, very short space of time.
Hmm. And I think one of the questions, and well done, by the way, for trying to actually do that concisely, because I know that we could have gone down any number of rabbit holes there. But one of the things that's coming up now as people talk about Ruben Amorim and his attempt to take on this job and just everything the job entails, right, is something we spoke about right at the start of last season, which was the merits of backing a manager who, for example, this quite openly there were discussions with other managers the summer prior to the start of the season, and there were candidates who were being looked at, and the choice was ultimately made not to, because it was down to availability or preferred candidates, etc., cost, whatever it might have been. But then there's that decision to stick with the manager, but then also then there's the other decision that came with that, which was to back the manager in the transfer market and allow him to then go out and pursue players. And we spoke about them. We were looking at some of these players, and I think you may have gone through all of them and talked about their individual merits as
Hmm.
good players and the strengths and weaknesses that they had. But then again, question, how does it all come together? And that's what you wanted to try and see, right? And I mean, what we have seen so far is that a lot of those pieces didn't really or haven't seemed to come together as it looked like that was going to be the case on paper, but even so much on the pitch as well. That's something that the manager is now having to contend with, Ruben Amorim, in terms of lots of discussion around his preferred tactical approach and does he have the pieces for it. I think that's been a theme of the season, actually, not
Hmm.
just with him. Different managers, are they being pragmatic enough? If you start to delve into pragmatism, do you lose yourself? Do you lose your identity? Is that the slippery slope? So I suppose it's a difficult way to round it to a question here, uh, but before a ball had been kicked and Ruben Amorim was manager of Manchester United, what did you see as his job for the remainder of this season? And what did you think was realistic? So this is again, I'm trying to ask you to purge all the memories
Okay.
of everything you've
This
seen.
is this is a very good question. Now, to answer this in all honesty, the best and worst thing that happened to Ruben Amorim between the announcement and him becoming the Manchester United head coach was the fact he beat Manchester City 4-1 in charge of Sporting, right? So, I'm not going to pass comment on how many Premier League, Portuguese league games your average Manchester-based or London-based or Bristol-based football fan is watching. But I'm not going to say it's in a double digits per season. However, a very, very loud and prominent way to show yourself to Europe's top five leagues is to just go out and beat Manchester City 4-1 at a time where we didn't quite realize or didn't quite grasp what is going on at Manchester City. Let's call this the beginning of the wobble of Manchester City, and Sporting essentially trample on them. They trample on them in the way that quite a few teams have begun to figure out. We've always known Manchester City can be liable to counterattacks, especially when they are um, Rodri-less, Fernandinho-less, Vincent Kompany-less, Ruben Diaz-less. And Sporting went off and beat him 4-1. And before that game, I remember Ruben Amorim said, please don't read too much into this one game. Don't extrapolate too many conclusions. If I win this game, Manchester United fans are going to start calling me a second coming of Sir Alex Ferguson. It was very much trying to downplay what his team might be capable of, and then go off and do that. Now, the really interesting thing about that performance was afterwards, Pep Guardiola said, this Sporting team can run. And I've watched that game more than once, and I think the big difference, or the thing that is becoming very, very clear between Sporting, or between the other teams that have been successful against Manchester City that aren't Manchester United, or the other teams that are currently successful at the top half of the Premier League. In particular, I want to pick up Nottingham Forest, which ironically is one of the few teams that haven't beaten Man City, is
Mhm.
running capacity. There is a running capacity and a physicality evident to that Sporting team that is not possible in this Manchester United team, which means what Amorim is able to do and what Amorim wants are two very different things. We can even go back to what Arne Slot said after the 3-0 at Old Trafford. And first of all, yeah, I mean, his explanation of the 3-0 was fantastic because he essentially broke down rest defense and said one of the big problems for Man United is their rest defense is quite poor. They send both their fullbacks forward. They have two centre backs and they have one defensive midfielder. So if you can win the ball back, there's space behind the wing, there's space behind the fullbacks, and also, and I believe Arne Slot said, and you have, I've looked at the quotes before. He said, and you have to run. And luckily, we have players who can run. And he brought up Ryan Gravenberg. He brought up Alexis McAllister. And you look at this Pep Guardiola's quotes after the 4-1. He said Sporting can run. And then pretty much week one of Amorim turning up, he said physicality, we need to improve our physicality. Um, how your football team runs, how your football team responds to the opposition running, where your football team runs, and do they run intelligently for 90 minutes is the big thing in the Premier League between now and however long. I think when City do figure themselves out, be it Pep Guardiola in charge, whoever else in charge, they're probably going to get a lot taller again. You're going to see another team of 6 foot giants. I think Arsenal are probably going to try and get another 6 foot player in the summer as well. So that's a big thing. And you look at this Manchester United team, and it's not the tallest. It is not a. It's not very good in terms of ground coverage. So if you look at their summer signings, there are players who there's a very good Manchester United commenter on the Athletic, and he described Manchester United as being very good at making what he called silo signings. So signings that make sense in complete isolation, siloed off from each other, but perhaps signings that don't make sense in connection to each other. And I think a good example of this is someone like, say, Matthijs de Ligt. Matthijs de Ligt is a very good centre back. He's a good progressive passer. He can be good in the air. He's a good tackler. He's a very good man marking tackler. He's not especially different in player profile to Harry Maguire. And to which you have club analysts, football scouts going, okay, why would you buy Matthijs de Ligt if you've already got Harry Maguire, unless Harry Maguire is really on his last legs and you need that sort of profile? Surely it makes more sense to go out and purchase someone who can play next to Maguire, who has complementary weaknesses, shall we say, who can cover up Maguire's lack of pace. And I think you've take that sort of signing and multiply it by 3 or 4 times, and things small issues become much bigger issues because you don't necessarily have that player who can solve that. I think Liverpool's a very good example of this right now, in that Liverpool have multiple players, multiple centre backs of different playing styles, so that even if one player goes down injured, I think Ibu Konate is fantastic recovery pace. And yet, when he is injured, there are other players who have as good or close to as good recovery pace. So Liverpool don't immediately become susceptible to counterattacks. And you're not constantly going, oh God, we need Ibu back because no one else is as quick as him. Whereas I think at Manchester United, there are far too many scenarios and situations where if one player goes down, their Manchester United's ability to do certain things on a football field that I would consider essential in 2024, 2025, absolutely crater. And you saw this against Newcastle. Manuel Ugarte was suspended, and Manchester United's ability to battle and duel and win tackles in midfield completely cratered, which feels remarkable to say when one of the players who started was the 5-time Champions League winner, Casemiro. But here we are.
Yeah, I mean, you cover a lot of ground in that, and I think it's something that's been interesting actually. I mean, it's a theme that was heavily emphasized under Klopp, that ability to run, the physicality.
Hmm.
For all that Arne Slot's been really like effective at communicating tactics and actually, I think has shown himself to be. I mean, so I think better is the wrong word, but I think you can see this is a very deep thinking kind of tactician. He
I
makes a
think
number of
it's
changes
different.
in the
I
games, right?
I think this is Arne Slot. Arne Slot is in charge of Jurgen Klopp team,
Yeah.
and I think it's churlish to call this Arne Slot's team or Arne Slot's project or
Yeah.
peak Arne Slot right now, in that
Mhm.
he's using tools that were brought in by Jurgen Klopp, and he is getting something different out of quite a few of
Mhm.
these players, and he has recalibrated them very well. Um, and I am interested to see what he will do in the next 2 or 3 transfer windows as we get a greater grasp of what an Arne Slot team might be. I also
Mhm.
suspect, depending on how your contract negotiations go, that Arne Slot might decide maybe I don't need to have my version of a team yet. Maybe some of the things that Jurgen Klopp left um, are actually more beneficial for what's necessary ahead. You know, a different kind of pragmatism, as it were. But at this point in time, I think, I mean, we can do an entire podcast episode just on Ryan Gravenberg, because as a Manchester United fan with Eric Ten Hag in charge, having watched a lot of Ajax games, I am
Mhm.
astonished by how well he has adjusted to this deeper midfield role.
Yeah, no, and again, he was somebody that we that we discussed actually, thinking that in that pod ahead of the season, sort of seeing how he would cope with the role that we knew he was going to be given at that stage, given sort of Liverpool weren't able to convince Supermendi, and so we'll definitely come on to Grav. I think it's pretty hard not to. He's gone from a player on the periphery to one who we're looking at any game we can find to rest him effectively because everyone's a bit scared about what he does when he's, I mean, he's already in uncharted territory in terms of minutes played in his entire career. So I don't know how he's, I mean, no one knows how he's going to react, but any opportunity we can find to give him a rest is one that we'll take. And that's an incredible transformation for the player. But the point I was making about Slot was just that one thing that has been interesting about some of his post-match comments has been when Liverpool haven't played as well, or when he's had grievances that he's mentioned, people have been at pains to sort of get him to give a tactical explanation like he has done before. And very often he's just come down to, oh, we thought we couldn't run.
Hmm.
Right? And we thought we could get away with that. And you go, oh, it's the same kind of intensity focused approach as the previous regime. I'm sure he's got things he wants to do, like you said, tactically, and ways he wants to refine this team. But it's been very funny in the games where Liverpool have dropped off a little bit or they've had tougher time. It's often been him saying, "Oh yeah, we just thought we could get away without running," and then the second half they ran. And you look at the stats and you go, oh yeah, they cranked up the running and then they managed to get hold of a game. So I think very much, as you say, the Premier League is you're seeing that those teams that have the physicality to 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 dominate or be contesting in that aspect of the game, really really tough to deal with. I mean, like even the likes of Fulham, Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest, who you mentioned, there's some others who I think are more than competitive in that area. You mentioned Ugarte. I mean, I want to ask him. Lenny Yoro's his season's obviously been massively hampered by the injury he picked up. He is a player who actually you look at and think has the kind of recovery pace that you might need, has the instincts you need. Very young, of course. Ugarte has that physicality, I'd say, is the one thing that you had seen about him is his ability to get around the pitch, even for sides that dominate possession, just loves a duel. But the rest, as you say, isolation makes more sense than necessarily joined up. You highlighted, I think it was Ahmad actually, was it as
Hmm.
your kind of player of 2024 in terms of maybe that's recency or whatever it is, but the fact that he has come to the fore and been so involved as other attackers have had a tougher time at United. Um, Mention him. Feel free to talk about him and sort of what's made him, be the success story so far of the last, I guess, 6, 7 months.
Well, it's a really interesting journey. So he was signed for a fee that could rise up to 37 million in the January of
Yeah,
2021.
who
In
signed
January
him?
2021. This has often been a point of contention. So, I mean, he arrived in the January, I should say. He was signed in the summer. So 19 million and impossible based on add-ons could go up to 37 million, depending on who you talk to. And this is very much a depending on who you talk to. He was either a player as part of their Brexit stockpiling for the academy, or he was a potential Jadon Sancho backup. If you remember the summer's Jadon Sancho signing in 2020, where United eventually were quoted a fee of 125 million and decided to walk away for Sancho, only to buy him again the summer afterwards. Um, and there was some confusion over which team he was going to originally land into. You have to bear in mind COVID considerations. He gets his debut goal in a 1-1 draw against AC Milan, a really inventive backheader. And I had been very, very keen on him, having read some scouting reports and looked at some analysis from people who are a lot more au fait with Serie A and Atalanta and the Primavera teams over there. And they were saying this player is phenomenal, incredible dribbler and whatnot. But yes, he's really taken the circuitous route, a so-so loan at Rangers, and then a much better loan at Sunderland on the Tony Mowbray. Tony Mowbray was on Football Focus over this Christmas period recently. He appears to have beaten a bout of cancer, and he was talking about no longer being Sunderland manager and all the changes and sort of how he is in life there. And he brought up Ahmad and he spoke about Ahmad in this way an uncle talks about a nephew that they're very very proud of. as well. But returns to this start of the season, and while his quality is there, and we've seen his quality in phases, and Liverpool fans felt that quality in the FA Cup quarter final, Eric Ten Hag was always reluctant to play him, um, for reasons that never, for reasons that some of those made sense, and some of those not quite, if I'll be brutally honest with you. So, first things first, he is 5'6", 5'7", and he is very, very slight. And I think particularly in his time at Rangers, and in some preseason games for Manchester United, there were times where he was very clearly on the ball, very, very talented, will take it past one defender, and other defenders go, I'm just going to run through you now, which made it quite hard to mitigate his ability. I remember watching him play for Nottingham Forest before New Year's Day. I think it was, no, in fact, it was December 30th, 2023. And he came on, and it was an okay performance. And to which he was an okay performance. And there was a little bit where he lost the ball once, retreated back, and Bruno Fernandes sort of pointed out here, 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 and here, as a like sort of, this is what we need you to do better. And I remember reporting on this one. That might be a reason why Erik Ten Hag might be reluctant to play him, because on that right hand side in particular, where Ahmad is at his best, there were two or three bits in terms of positional play off out of possession where he got caught. And yet you put the ball at his feet, and you're seeing this guy, and he is in. There are moments where he is incredible. He's got something a bit similar to Jadon Sancho, where he is, because he is undersized and because he isn't necessarily the quickest football player, he very much lives or dies on his match reading intelligence. And as he has now played more games since Erik Ten Hag has departed, Ruud van Nistelrooy brought him into the team and very clearly wants to get him closer to Bruno Fernandes. Amadi, I would say, is probably one of the more intelligent attackers in the United squad. And there's been times where he has taken United players, not just the fans, but also his teammates, by surprise by how he manages to get a ball away in the final third. Where there are other players that perhaps will run down the corridor and lose possession, he manages to stop, turn around, swing his frame. He's deceptively small frame, and keep the ball. He was very. There was the Everton game. United win 4-0. A brace for Marcus Rashford, a brace for Joshua Zirkzee, but everyone is in agreement that man of the match belongs to Ahmad, because he essentially did everything. Two great assists, and he beat up Braithwaite and Tarkowski when they were off balance. He's very good at recognizing when the defender is off balance and going, I'm now going to press you on the ball back. He's left-footed, but he can also go on the outside on his right foot as well, which, again, these are things that perhaps don't sound revelatory if you're a Liverpool fan, because you are blessed with riches in attacking positions. But if you're a Manchester United fan at the moment, these are things that come in rare supply. So he has been a bright spot. One of the questions now is essentially, he might be too good to put into one position, in that his best position might be one of the tens behind the number centre forward, but also because of that two-footedness ability to go inside and outside, he might be needed at right wing back between now and the end of the season, which is it's a very United way of having a problem, in that you finally got one player after however many years finally sees their opportunity, but also due to problems elsewhere, you have to put them somewhere else.
Yeah, well, yeah, putting a star young winger at right wing back. I'm trying to think the last time a Liverpool audience will think about that is probably Lazar Markovic, one
Hmm.
from the past who Rodgers didn't really understand or didn't seem to grasp what to do with him. Not many managers have, to be honest, since he left Portugal. And yeah, right wing back. And I remember there were two or three cameos. He must have been super young as well, which looked pretty promising to be honest. And I think with Diallo, I think what's interesting for a player so young is that he's already had like so many, or feels like he's had so many big moments, like in big games. Of course, the Liverpool winner, City, other games as well, where even if it's not goals, the performance has been the thing that people have come away talking about. So he's certainly been a bright spark. And I wanted to. I mean, let's go back to the question we were just asking around Amorim and what were your expectations when he came in. Yeah, this is a manager who was linked with Liverpool as well
Hmm.
before Arne Slot eventually was given the job. And I remember at that time the discussion of his kind of tactical approach came up, and I think Mel Reddy may have written at the time that the reason the club decided not to go with Amorim was because of his tactical approach and sort of the feeling that that wouldn't really suit the players that Liverpool had at their disposal. That question, of course, becomes incredibly relevant now. You've already talked about the physicality is the main thing he's kind of mentioned beyond before you get into tactics. Um, Given that, I suppose the the decision for him to come in midway through the season, I'm sure it wasn't what he would have preferred.
Hmm.
And now he is being bombarded with these questions week in, week out, similar to Ange Postecoglou, around you need to change. Like you don't
Hmm.
get it. The league is you don't get it. Like we understand you're a aspiring young manager with noble ideas about the world, but the world is not what you think it is. You need to change. And I fully understand his response when I saw that interview with Neville about the second you do that, it's a dangerous precedent to set. Where do you think fans are on that? Because it's a position he's been put in as the coach,
Hmm.
and I wonder what you think. I mean, results are all that matters in some ways when you're trying to build a reputation and you can't really get to the end of the season and be insufferable to the end of the season. People aren't going to forget that. They can't just wipe the slate clean and forget about that. So he's in a tricky position as a coach, isn't he?
He's in a really tricky position. I think in these early press conferences, he's talked about how things will take time. He said words to the effect of things will take time, but also understand as a Manchester United fan, as a Manchester United manager, you have to earn time with wins. Now, we're talking off the back of a December where they've lost 6 matches. However, one of those victories was in the Manchester derby. So that gives you a little bit more cachet. And I think there's quite a few Manchester United fans talking right now uh, about these upcoming two fixtures, Liverpool and Arsenal. And it's less about, oh, he's got to change, and more about we'll take our lumps, deal with this, and then we'll see what's going on when you play Southampton closer to the middle of January. I think it's this talk about changing your system and pragmatism is really, really interesting to me because I'm always the one banging the dictionary saying pragmatism doesn't just mean defensive football. Pragmatism means looking at all the resources available to you and deciding what's best. Now, you can be a pragmatic football manager and also play attacking football. I think, in fact, I think Ange Postecoglou isn't too far off being pragmatic. I think if you look at that Tottenham Hotspur squad, you have better attackers than you have defenders. You may as well try and win more games 3-1 than try and
Yeah.
scratch and claw 1-0. I think the interesting thing with Manchester United is, like you say, Liverpool had to look at him in the summer. West Ham had to look at him to the point where he had to apologize to sporting fans for getting as far as he did with the West Ham interview process when they looked to be moving away from David Moyes. And I think both of those clubs looked at sorry, not Ange Postecoglou, looked at Ruben Amorim and looked at the fact that Ruben Amorim, 250, the last 275 games he's been a football manager, he's used the 3-4-3 or 3-4-2-1 in well pretty much all of them. And I was there at his first press conference when we're ahead of the Ipswich game, and he's being asked constantly about this three at the back. And Amorim is talking in the style that loads of modern football managers do, which is starting formations mean nothing. They are telephone numbers. That don't pay attention to them. And he's very much saying sometimes it's a back three, but sometimes it's a back four, but also sometimes it's a back five, which is correct depending on phase of play. If you're at possession, if you're out of possession, if your majority of players are past halfway line, whatnot, it can all change. And yet there's this very rigid thinking that it's a 3-4-3 and it's always going to be a 3-4-3 and whatnot. Just because the starting formation is a 3-4-3 doesn't mean Man United are going to shift to a 4-3-3 during particular phases of play. Is what Amorim is trying to say. And I think one thing Amorim has been saying quite often is what you're going to see is an idea, and I'm trying to communicate an idea towards this team. I think it's really interesting that Liverpool looked at Amorim and thought maybe not, because I look at that Liverpool team, and there's definitely the potential to do that, to do a 3-4-3 in the same way as Sporting Lisbon. I think perhaps the concern for a team like Liverpool would be the succession planning, and I think that will always be a concern for any club that shifts to a three at the back. I mean, if we talk about the Premier League's recent history of three at the back, Thomas Tuchel. quite successful at Chelsea using it, as was Antonio Conte. However, it's quite hard to start shopping for 3-4-3 players. There's fewer wing backs than there are fullbacks. Uh, it's very, very rare that you and I will play five-a-side or play 11-a-side at Sunday League and say, "Oh, I'm a wing back," but just if only because coaches like prefer to coach a back four because a four is just a lot easier to divvy up into a football field, etc., etc., etc. So that is always a concern. You always need to. I think the clubs that have had the most long term, and I use long term as in 18 months plus success with this sort of formation, tend to have very strong academies and tend to have managers who care about the academy as well and have managers that can go, I'm going to take a winger or I'm going to take your fullback and I'm going to now convert you into a wing back based on what I want. And Amron is making all the right noises and gestures about that so far. However, like you say, it's a lot easier to do that when you've got cachet in the bank and you've got money in the bank and whatnot. And at the moment, Amarin's in this very odd position where his credit is in press conferences, or primarily in press conferences, because his strength right now is Ten Hag's weakness. Ten Hag was not the most erudite or um, concise
Mm.
communicator in press conference, and Amarin so far is. Amarin comes across as very charismatic in these press conferences, and I think you are seeing quite a few Manchester United fans, even on social media, when Amarin looks stressed out in the dugout, they're saying, "Oh my God, we've ruined his life," rather than the "Oh my God, what's Amarin doing? Is making things worse." I think there is a odd understanding that Manchester United are perhaps dragging Amarin down to his level, down to United's weird swamp-like level, which United have been doing for a while. I think there's been conversation right now about Dani Olmo and his odd registration status at Barcelona, and quite a few fans go, "Oh, could United go get Dani Olmo?" To which the other more cynical United fan goes, "Why would you get him? We're going to ruin him anyway." I think that's the sort of system right now. I think the fact that Amarin decided to jump mid-season is interesting, and that speaks to the fact that he, like many other football managers, have a bit of an ego. I also think if you are Amarin's manager, agent, or representative right now, you're probably going, should we have waited until the summer instead? And just should Manchester United have just had Ruud van Nistelrooy for however long? But then again, you look at Ruud van Nistelrooy right now. He does his full match interim stint and was looking very, very well, and multiple Premier League clubs were looking at him, and now he's been in charge of Leicester City for a bit, and are quite a few people going, "Ooh, that's a bit different." So this is management in the Premier League. It can change very,
Mm.
very quickly.
Yeah, no, Van Nistelrooy, I think, yeah, some of the shine's come off in terms of just, yeah, the sheer number of shots Leicester are now conceding every single game, I think, since he's been there. And you're right, managers can quickly change. I was going to bring up actually before you did the fact that the one thing he does have in his corner is what you mentioned, the fact that he's clearly a better communicator, and he's clearly able to build this rapport, I think, with the
Hmm.
media running away around, not belittling them, sort of saying, "Yeah, I get it, I understand. Yeah, of course, I understand these perspectives, but I was hired for my idea. It works, it does. I just need some time to embed it, and for the players to understand it, and for between the lines, other players to be in this squad to enable me
I,
to do it."
I very much enjoyed his recent one with Neville, where he sort of said, "Well, the previous system wasn't working beforehand." It
Yeah,
was he said words to the effect, the previous system wasn't working beforehand, and I don't believe in it. So why would I go back to that system?
yeah.
Why would I go back to the system that got the previous man fired?
So, yeah.
Um, and yeah, absolutely right. And I think there are. I'm talking to you right now. I do talk with Devils, the Athletics Manchester United podcast. We've got a mailbox, and we've had two or three people go, "I'm not having three at the back already. You need to change and whatnot." To which I brutally want to say, any Manchester United fan who thinks they should change shape right now, um, it defeats the object of bringing Amra at this point in time. Um, and I think this is very often been a problem, not just for Manchester United, but is often the case for many super clubs. So clubs that have won the Champions League more than twice, clubs that view themselves as teams that, when before the ball has even been kicked, want to be in the Champions League quarterfinal in April. Um, it's very hard for them to. It's very hard to stomach a rebuild that can take more than one season. And I think there's been two or three times where United fans have come up to me and goes, "Oh, it feels like writing the season off already." To which, unfortunately, uh, the season's been over for a while. Well, in terms of achievement, in terms of Champions League top four finishing, in terms of doing very well, save for an incredible run in the Europa League. I don't think Manchester United will be playing European football next season. And I think it's also the fact that sometimes you can write off a season. It's not the worst thing in the world. Sometimes it's worth. Sometimes you can write off a season if you are trying to get a particular thing sorted, or if there's a particular thing that needs to get remedied. And I think what a recent half decent example is Newcastle. So Newcastle last season, as you know, get into the Champions League, but their out of possession approach isn't as well suited to playing twice a week, and the wheels sort of fall off for a part of the section. And what you've seen throughout that season and what you're seeing now is Eddie Howe further refining his out of possession approach to going, right, I got that bit wrong. How do I do it now? And we're talking right now, and Newcastle have won 5 matches in a row, and Sandro Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes have finally seemed to have come together as a midfield. It's not the worst thing in the world to write off a season if you know what you want to get or you want to achieve by the start of next season. I think that's always been a bit difficult for clubs like Manchester United, for clubs like Real Madrid, for clubs like Barcelona, for clubs like AC Milan.
I suppose whenever you're embedding any new system as well, or you're a new manager coming to the club, that acceptance of, okay, we're going on a journey here, it's going to take some time, is easier to stomach when you can see a few sort of green
Hmm.
shoots that it's going the right way. And I think just because of some of the results in December, and because of actually, if the weakness is as has been identified, physicality, there's not much you can do to deal with that as a weakness unless you, I mean, you take the time to improve the physicality of the players who have that capacity to get better physically, or you replace those players with players who have that capacity to run. I think with Manchester City at the moment as well, very reminiscent for Liverpool fans of the 22-23 season, where I think there's a guy who pods with regularly, Dan Kennett, who like to say you need a group of players to play the piano, and then others to carry it. And
Exactly.
City no longer have those players to carry it because still plenty of players who can
Hmm.
twinkle fingers in terms of they can write a tune, but yeah, if you can't carry it in a similar way to the fact that Jordan Henderson couldn't, Fabinho couldn't all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden you're conceding goals that you usually score against other teams. That's yeah, it's very difficult to find a tactical innovation that's going to sort that out completely anyway, without dealing with the underlying issue. So, do you think that is something that we are in January? Is that it is a transfer window, all the caveats about value, etc., etc. Do you think it's something that the club would be looking to try and address if they can? Like, could we get one or two players in here to help the manager and help things look a little bit rosier?
Now, all the noises we've heard since the 3-0, more or less. So since the close of the summer window was essentially United were not going to be busy shoppers in January. Um, Obviously, I mean, since the close of the January transfer window, Dan Ashworth has left. Eric Ten Hag has departed. Ruben Amorim's come in. There was 14 million spent to well, at least 11 million spent to give Eric Ten Hag a handshake and a goodbye, and close to that figure, or close to a top five transfer figure to bring Ruben Amorim in as well. Now, there was a point, and I will say the Athletic reported during Eric Ten Hag's slump, what during around international breaks, where one of the questions was, can Manchester United even afford to let go of Eric Ten Hag? And yet some money was found somewhere. And I think that is probably the situation we might be in this January international
Hmm.
break. Sorry, in this January transfer window where there is no money or there's very little money. Manchester United have very little money to spend. They are also either very close to going over the edge of PSR, FFP, or they
Yeah.
might already or or they are already in the red, might be being told soon that you need to rein it in.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
we're not sure. That what there was a very, very, very generous COVID allowance given to Manchester United to keep them to stop them from entering PSR, much to the chagrin of clubs like Newcastle and others saying, "Hang on, why did you get away with that?" So we'll see.
Hmm.
However, so everything we've heard so far is there's very little money. Manchester United are very much in a sell to buy territory. However, much similar to the Eric Ten Hag situation, we do know Sir Jim Ratcliffe seems to have a bit of an ego and seems to have a sporting ego as well. And if Sir Jim Ratcliffe gets to a point where he decides he's not willing to wait for a situation and can be convinced or comes to the belief that spending some amount of money might help, that might
Hmm.
that is a scenario. So I'm not going to say Manchester United are going to spend no money, but I do think that that is a possibility. In terms of how much money can Sir Jim Ratcliffe's or his ego or his credit card stretch to, I have no idea. So players like Dani
Yeah.
Olmo, players like Nunez, uh, who knows? What I can tell you is, if I'm looking at this Manchester United squad right now, and money was no option, the first thing they need is a left-footed wing back,
Okay.
probably two. You're looking at, for the majority of the calendar year of 2024, Manchester United didn't have a left-footed left back, didn't have a specialist. Luke Shaw was injured, Tero Malacia was injured. Diogo Dalot played a lot of minutes at left back as well. And before the season even started, Luke Shaw was injured again. And I think one of my predictions was Dalot was going to play more minutes at left back than he would at right back all season. And I think we're approaching that already. So someone
Hmm.
who can play on the left with a left foot, who can go outside and also can probably use their right foot and go on the right would be really interesting. This another player who's also left footed who can go on the right wing back would be really useful as well because so much of United's build-up play on their Emirates now is down the wing. What you'll probably see at Anfield is a lot of United's build-up patterns will well, if Liverpool do their job defensively, Liverpool probably stop United and cause them to play in a quite impotent U shape, because the central midfield pivot will be unable to handle Alexis and another, and therefore their wing backs will probably have to shoulder quite a lot of the burden, which at least I haven't watched too much Liverpool recently, but I'm pretty sure you're quite strong in defending in wide areas as well. So we'll see what
Hmm.
happens there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we'll definitely come on to the game itself. I think if Liverpool fans were to pick one area of the pitch at the moment where we think is probably the weakest in the squad, it's probably left back actually in terms of just realizing I mean, the passage of time when it comes to Andy Robertson and what he can and can no longer do,
Hmm.
and what he's now more susceptible to, especially if he's rolling out and playing one, two, three games in a short period of time. So that's seen Tsimikas be used more, and a lot of teams have targeted that side, and there's definitely been he's been at the scene of a lot of crimes, is what I'd say. Even when he's not necessarily directly culpable, there's been red cards, there's been penalties, there's
That's a
been
fascinating way to phrase it. Been in the scene of a lot of crimes.
yeah, it's the way you phrase it when you accept that the guy's a legend at the club and you think, okay, I really don't want to have to criticize you too much here, but that was really stupid. Like why have you done that? Like why did you pull that player back? Why did you make that challenge? Oh, that seems a bit lazy. Are you just really tired? All these things. So yeah, been at the scene of many crimes is what I'd say. But I think yeah, I expect to be a big focus on that for the weekend's game. And I expect Szoboszlai actually to be the one who comes in for this game, just based upon physicality and the
Hmm.
fact that that guy is yeah setting records in terms of sort of just the amount of running he's doing. Probably a bit threatened by what Tonali's doing of late, so wants the opportunity to come in and show. I guess I mean it's hard to answer the question. From everything you're saying, it sounds as though what Amorim really has to do is accept that there's not much of a salve in January. It's about figuring out a way to embed these ideas more in the players, get them more comfortable with them, whilst recognizing it's not going to be perfect by any means. It's going to be perhaps a little bit tougher until he gets good. Obviously, lots was made about his answers to the question about relegation
Hmm.
and sort of like being involved in that kind of battle. I just think he was being pretty upfront as the table shows in terms of the points total. But it sounds like it could be you mentioned his agent earlier on and what would have been best for the image, but it sounds like he's going to grit his teeth and work for a number of months to try and grind this team through the season before he can really start to do the major surgery that maybe he needs to do.
Yeah, yeah, that's probably the most accurate way of saying it. After
Mm.
the Newcastle defeat, he said he's only had 4 training sessions with all of us together,
Yeah,
which
yeah, yeah.
this is it. Not only was it interesting that you joined the mid-season, but also you're joining just before one of the most congested periods of the
Yeah.
calendar. The being knocked out of the League Cup against Spurs may be useful if you're that. And I was there for their Europa League game against Pilsen in the Czech Republic. And Amarin said, for us, it is absolutely massive that we finish in the top 8 of the league phase. He said, we do not want 2 extra games that come from knockouts. He goes, for other clubs, that might be useful for you for financial reasons, but for Manchester United, we absolutely don't want that. United are playing Arsenal in the third round of the FA Cup right now. I would suspect, based on nothing, gut feeling, that that might not be the strongest starting 11 from Amarin ahead of that game because Amarin will probably want training time. He probably wants contact time. He's spoken before about how something I found quite enjoyable. He goes, modern players nowadays, if you give them a video that's more than 12 minutes, forget it. And he said if he's very, very particular about the red zone, so the post recovery bit. And he said if you play 90 minutes on a Thursday, you can't train again before Sunday. He goes, maybe I think he said maybe Bruno because Bruno's a freak, but that's about it. He doesn't want you doing anything else. But there are ways you can do other things. So their classroom sessions, he's talking about making them very, very short, which is interesting because there were conversations about how Eric Ten Hag's ones were north of 20 minutes. Um, so there's that bit. He also said if you can't run, then we'll walk you through drills. So they're doing walking drills as well, and just finding new ways of getting bits to train. And I think this is it. This is the era of churn at Manchester United. This is the era of just gritting your teeth and gutting it out. I think this is probably an era where you will see a. I mean, Manchester United are very, very proud of their academy record, and they're very, very proud of giving academy debuts. There might be a little bit of a spike in that as Amarin looks to the academy. If he gets a bit more time to go, I need X and I can't buy X, but is there someone available to give me that for the next 4 to 6 weeks? And I think Carrington might be able to do that. If only because, and I know we joke about this all the time, I don't know what they're feeding these kids in these English academies now, but they all seem to be 6'4" now. So height might be useful there. I think there are 2 or 3 players who, at least on paper and at least in certain instances when they're playing at their academy level, look to have some form of physicality and offering there. Whether or not that will scale when you go from running against 18-year-olds to running against 24-year-olds, or running against players in their later stages of their career who perhaps can't run but also know the dark arts, such as Andrew Robinson, will be interesting there as well. So I think the Manchester United squad between now and the end of this season will have a lot of new faces that play maybe 2 to 3 matches as Amarin just gets to look at them. Um, and I think that will take time to get used to. I think Man United fans will go, "Oh, new academy player. He might be the second coming." Only for Amarin to go, "Well, he was useful for this bit, but perhaps not, and whatnot." So, and Manchester United that only plays 1 game a week is not good for many corporate and commercial interests, but it's probably quite useful for Ruben Amorim. So we'll see where we are at the end of January.
Yeah, no, I'm sort of wouldn't say I'm excited, but I think it's basically it's a talented young coach who has a big job ahead of him in embedding his ideas and doing the coaching, the
Hmm.
hard yards coaching, because there is no other way to you know resolve this in the short term, as we discussed, right? So I think as long as everybody buys into that, I think then you should be okay with what you see. I think in terms of sort of like what's possible for him. I was gonna. I mean, I'm conscious of time, so I do want to get onto the game. I was going to talk a little bit about Xerxes, and I was going to talk about Rashford, and I was going to talk about Garnacho, and I was going to talk about players not doing like players going through tough times and then how fans react to that. And I mean, I think especially the issue around Xerxes and him being sort of jeered off and things like that. And I'm not trying to be holier than that. I've never understood that. I just don't get. And I think Nunez is a wonderful example at Liverpool in that. I'm pretty sure, and this is rivalry aside, I'm pretty sure if Nunez played for United and had been having the season he's currently having, he would be having a very tough time at Old Trafford because the patient, and maybe that's just because of what United have gone through the past few
No, I
seasons. And
think what I will offer you a counter here. So
okay, sure.
I'll offer you a counter. I mean, it's interesting you bring up Nunez because there was a point where it looked as if Manchester United were in for him. Something I
Mm,
do find particularly interesting is obviously Manchester City are going through a pronounced slump. And there are multiple Manchester City players who have given answers in post-match interviews or given whatnot that have, I think it's reasonable to assume a number of those City players have not been in a slump like this before. And it's the first time they've encountered this sort of negative spiral of results and
Ruben
whatnot.
Diaz, the
And
interviews.
some of those answers indicate shock at that happening. And I will say for a fact that more than one Manchester United fan I've heard go, some of these City players wouldn't be able to hack it at United. In a half joking, ha ha, it's not that fun now, like you're losing to. And I will say I'm a Man United fan of a certain age. There are certain City fans in that I'm talking to nowadays, particularly the under 25s, and they're sort of talking about their losing streak. And I'm like, you're looking at old matches now, aren't you? Yeah. Yeah, look at you. Look at you sharing old clips on social media all of a sudden. This is how it starts. So there's that. Now, to be a lot more serious about what happened with Xerxes, let's be very, very clear. Manchester United were dreadful for the first 35 minutes against Newcastle. And I think if Sandro Tonali had put his shot slightly inside the post, that there's a game that could have gone from being 2-0, 3-0 to the floodgates being open and whatnot. And I think Xerxes was in that very unfortunate position where a change needed to be made. Any number of Manchester United players could have been subbed off. Unfortunately, it was Xerxes, and Xerxes is in this very difficult situation in that he is a brand new signing. He's a signing of a He's a signing, and a number of the people involved in his signing and his sign off are no longer at the club as well. So he represents some of the ills of a old era, and he's struggling to find his footing as well. So there's a lot of, oh my God, who authorized this person? Is this person going to ever come good? Should we just chalk it off? So there were a lot of ironic jeers, and there was some booing as well. I wasn't at the ground, but two or three people who were at the ground tell me that the boos were in response to some of the ironic jeers. Sort of, it's United fans booing other United fans, saying, "Give your head a wobble."
Sure, sure.
What I've seen in the aftermath is quite a number of United fans saying what happened towards Xerxes was a disgrace. We apologise to Xerxes. We hope that never happens again. People doing that need to sort their lives out. Gary Neville on commentary was very much saying there's a human being there and we need to sort that out. I think Amarin himself was quite good about his reaction to saying Josh is a good lad and we need to help him there as well. And that is really distressing, right? This is a
Mm.
football player who was very, very good for Bologna last season. It helps take a largely unfancy team who don't play too much Champions League football into the Champions League spaces. And when I was doing my research into him, when I was looking through match footage, when I was talking to people who are a lot more familiar with Serie A, they were saying, "Do not misprofile this player. Do not, don't think this player is going to get you 15 league goals in this season. Don't have your hopes pinned up on him. He's going to fix your goal scoring problems." Xerxes a 9.5 by his own definition, right? He's the sort of player who's going to drop deep, link up play, and hopefully, I think the intention initially was he was going to be the person, and I can kick long, he can drop deep, hold up the ball, and he was going to do the flick-ons or the through balls for Marcus Rashford, Alejandro Garnacho, and the other inverted forwards to flood the space afterwards.
Makes sense.
What we've seen, unfortunately, is the first touch and the release of the pass from Xerxes perhaps not as crisp as you saw in Serie A. Obviously, the jump between Serie A and the Premier League is a bit bigger, and also the box crashing from Xerxes himself is perhaps not at the liking of Manchester United. I think there've been two or three times where the flick on has happened, and then a player has got on their bike, taken the ball, and then when the player has reached the place where they're going to make the cross, Xerxes is still closer to the halfway line than he is to the edge of the penalty area, which has caused some frustration from United fans. There is a good football player in there. I don't know if there is a Manchester United football player in there. However, that is not an insult right now. I think there are plenty of very, very good football players who have proven not to be Manchester United football players. I think Angel Di Maria is one of the greatest football players the last 25 years. He is not a Manchester United football player. I think there was a point in time when Memphis Depay was a very good football player. Um, he was not a good Manchester United football player. And I look around Europe and I can see many other very good football players who I absolutely do not want Manchester United to purchase because I don't think they'd be good football players for Manchester United. So that's the situation with Xerxes as well. And I think
Yeah,
that is one thing that Amrin's got to deal with. And the other thing is obviously one of the most well-known football players in Europe, the football player that my mum, who doesn't know about football whatsoever, and a lot of mums that don't know anything about football whatsoever,
yeah.
think of the nice boy Marcus Rashford, doesn't appear to be playing and doesn't
Mm,
appear to be have a clear pathway as to what's going on. Now, the on-field whatnot as to that is one thing, but also there's the huge financial whatnot in that Marcus Rashford is one of the highest paid players at Manchester United, which means you're one of the highest paid players in the Premier League, which means you're one of the highest paid football players in the world. That's a lot of money to not have playing football on a week to week basis. And for whatever reason, the Admiral has chosen not to include him in full match day squads and not to feature him at all against Newcastle. That has to be remedied. And it sounds as if whatever remedy has to be found there has to start with what Rashford is doing first in and around Carrington. He has to show Amarin that he's capable of doing something that Amarin really, really wants. And Rashford hasn't been doing that so far. So that needs to be resolved before we can even approach
mm.
could he go to X club or Y club in January?
Yeah, no, I think just more fun things for a coach to have to grapple with
Mm.
if he didn't have enough to be dealing with. And yeah, I was even thinking actually as you were talking about Xerxes there, and the route back for players who go through those kind of situations. And um, Granit Xhaka's the one, isn't he? Really, when you
Hmm.
think about like the number of times that career is over. There's just no way this can come back at Arsenal. I mean, some of the things we saw, the throwing of the captain's armband, all sorts of stuff, the booing off, and to see how he managed to rehabilitate himself before, and so much so that actually even since he's been gone, Arsenal fans still thinking, oh, maybe we should have kept him. I think so. There's always a route back. On the game itself, then, I mean,
Hmm.
again, on these pods, we rarely talk too much about like the game, and let's microanalyze the game. I think the first thing that most listeners will have identified is we talked about physicality and that being the big issue for Man United. That is not an issue for Liverpool in terms of sort of the players they have at their disposal, especially after a bit of a break like the clubs have had in the lead up to this game. Also, this will probably be again probably the most coaching time Slot's had for a little bit of like a while as well. So interested to see if there's anything that comes out of that. But I mentioned Szoboszlai. I mentioned what I expect the Liverpool lineup to be, and it to be the lineup that's the most physical that we can go with. I imagine, um, or perhaps no, yeah, but I think probably that. And you can argue on
Can
Nunez
I
and
ask who
Diaz,
have you got in the
etc.
FA Cup?
Accrington Stanley.
Ah, right. Okay, so you can go a little bit heavier on your
Yeah,
physicality here as well. So this is
I. Th
interesting.
yeah, and I think everybody wants that to be the case in terms of we want to see Virgil van Dijk post a photo with like enjoying a non-alcoholic cocktail somewhere, like for that Accrington Stanley game. I want to see Mo Salah visiting his favorite sushi restaurant. I don't want him anywhere near
Very
that
much.
game.
Of course.
Gravenberg, Scrabble, whatever he wants to do. But I think yes, so I'd imagine this is going to be the full strength team for this fixture, and then heavy rotation afterwards. I hope. Given where United are, given what they're going through, given the very obvious weaknesses, I've seen some arrogance ahead of this game. Last season and in previous seasons, no matter what's happened with Liverpool, this fixture has been the most frustrating one on the planet for me. And I think last season's fixtures against Manchester United were
The trio.
by far the most frustrating games I've watched, and the Old Trafford one especially. Um,
Oh yeah, Jurgen
but
Klopp was angry at that one.
Furious.
I
Just
was I was there for that game, and his post-match press conference was
are Arsenal
um
going to come and be?
Jurgen there. So there is Jurgen Klopp when he loses, and there
Mm,
is Jurgen Klopp when it's a frustrating game. And I'd say the interesting thing about those post-match press conferences, you can you can tell when it's still playing on his mind, and the
mm,
frustration is building mid press conference. And there was one bit sticks with me. One reporter, I believe it was from The Guardian, asked him that would he support Manchester United when Arsenal came to visit, due to the nature of the title race, and he gave a shrug, but it was half a shrug of this is my answer, and half a shrug of what do you want me to say here? And he just went, yeah, probably. But also, when Arsenal come here, they're going to win because let's be realistic. This is not a good Manchester United team. And it was one of those, oh, you are that was a ridiculous game because also that was a game that very easily, I mean, Liverpool had, I want to say, north of 50
yeah.
shots against Manchester
Just
United on
many stupid decisions.
across those
Yeah.
50 across those three matches, had north of 50 shots across those three matches and didn't win a single one. Which is preposterous. Hilarious for me as a Manchester United fan.
Yeah.
I think what will be interesting here is there's loads to talk about physicality. There's also loads to talk about obviously Mo Salah being this is the most effective, or the most numerically or statistically satisfying first half of the season you've seen from an attacker. And something I am fascinated about is when a player reaches this sort of level, I always want to hear the Liverpool fan perspective or the fan perspective of how does this version of the player compare to previous seasons? So again, outside looking in, this is less Salah running up and down for 90 minutes and more Salah choosing his moments. But because he's still got that physical edge, those moments are so much more
Yeah.
decisive. I've never seen Salah this decisive as a playmaker as well. I think this is not new, but I think he's picking his moments a lot more as a playmaker on top of being a goal scorer. And something I always find quite interesting is he has a fantastic telepathy with Nunez. I don't know. I have no idea where this has come from, but I've never seen Salah and another Liverpool player just in the way that him and Nunez work. And yet, of course, it's not actually a great partnership because Nunez is a very
Yeah.
strange player.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think Salah probably has thought about what his numbers could be
Hmm.
if Nunez had the finishing touch that we all hoped. And you're right though in terms of movement. I think Salah and it's not just Nunez. I think the same with Diaz and the same with Gakpo. It's taken a bit of time to settle in, and Jota absolutely as well. But I think what you're seeing from Salah, and you're right, he's not the one who will do shuttle runs all game anymore. He's not the one even who the pace is what it was when he first arrived, that he can just get away from players and they're not catching him. I think that's gone. I think what's there is you're seeing the intelligence of the player, and the fact that he sort of gets it and understands where he needs to be or what he needs to do to help others. And yeah, the playmaking's there. It's been there for a while, but then I think you're just ruthlessly efficient. I think you just really, really, this is the most efficient version of Salah. Just like he's focused on his body fat percentage, he's doing this for the game. It's like he's cranking out every single bit of it. Naturally, I hope that contract is sorted as soon as possible. I think it
Hmm.
reading between the lines. I think it will be, despite all the
Yeah.
the great chess that's being played. But as I've
I'd
said
I'd
many
hate to play
times,
poker against him. Would hate to play
as
poker
I've said
against him.
many times, the last contract renewal that Rami and Mo Salah uh, did together with Liverpool is being taught as a Harvard Business School case study. Like you knew like and unfortunately he keeps having these starring performances. He every single interview is an opportunity. Although even he now actually seems to be slightly turning that down a bit. So we'll see. Yeah, I think it's in the club's interest to get that sorted out sooner rather than later, especially given what's going on with one Trent Alexander-Arnold. So, yeah, I mean, what are you expecting Amarin to try and do for this game, acknowledging all the context around it?
I think he will try and bolster the central midfield. I think Ugarte returning from suspension is big. And I think you'll probably see a midfield of Ugarte and maybe Mainu. I think what's been interesting for me is Amarin, despite his rotation to get through the December period, hadn't played Casemiro as much as I thought he would. It doesn't seem that Amarin is as keen as on Casemiro as perhaps some managers might be. Perhaps he's looked at Casemiro's running capacity and said, maybe not." So I think that's interesting. I think it might be also a change at the back. So Mazraoui has played some games in the back three and played some as a wing back. I think he might go for Mazraoui in a back three again, which you do lose some 1v1 defensive capabilities, but in terms of build-up play, it is a lot smoother. I think United do need to get out of being out of this sterile U that we've seen in recent games as well. Ahmad will probably go to right wing back. And then up front, I think it'll be Rasmus Højlund again. Højlund's a really interesting football player to me in that I think there is a potential there to be a good striker. And there are parts of his game that when he's at his best, it reminds me a lot of Ollie Watkins when Ollie Watkins was in the championship. The problem is there were huge parts or huge sections of the season where Eric Ten Hag was using him a bit like Olivier Giroud at Chelsea. So sort of that big post target man to try and get flick ons. And I don't think that's very, very good. I think Højlund is very much interested in improving himself as a football player and improving himself as a striker, and is very much playing or straining to improve his target man skills. So there will be bits where you'll see him wrestling with Virgil van Dijk, but also going, stop doing that, run the channels. You're a lot better running the channels. So how Amrin gets that working will be another big challenge there. And then of course there's the Bruno Fernandes question. In that Bruno Fernandes, at least in my mind, has just never had a good trip to Anfield. So at a time when we're talking about the great leadership and how everything's purring at Liverpool, it's quite interesting that Manchester United's captain, leader, is someone who has never really had a good trip at Anfield, but also is this player who is almost by captain by default. In that quite a few Man United fans who don't think Bruno, who believe Bruno is a good player, but don't believe he's a Manchester United captain material, you say, well, who'd you give it to? And they go, well, there's no one else really, which I suppose says a lot about this Manchester United squad.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think I've always, as a non-Man United fan, as a football fan, I've always questioned his suitability for that role, despite thinking he's a Manchester United player actually, and thinking that he's good enough to be. You talked about your good players and are they good enough to be Manchester United players? I think he's shown enough to indicate that he's able to handle the pressure. It's just is that captaincy necessarily the best thing for him? But then, yeah, as you point out, who else are you going to give that to? It sounds as though it's going to be a conservative approach at Anfield and trying to use that pace that you do have on the wings, as you mentioned, and there are some direct players there. I wouldn't recommend, yeah, tussling with Virgil. I'd recommend tussling with Kwanzaa. It's likely to be Kwanzaa, I believe.
Really?
Well,
Ah,
I
due
don't know. I
to
think
Gomez's injury status.
so. Gomez is out for at least, I think at least I don't want to March probably.
Uh-huh. And Ibu is
Uh,
out for.
That's the mystery in terms of like, there's been lots of photos of him recently. It does appear that he's very close. Whether
Hmm.
he is someone that we think is close enough to roll out for this game, we'll see. I think obviously the focus is on him coming back and being back for as
Hmm.
long as possible. So it would be a big vote of confidence to go with Quansah, given sort of some of his struggles this season. Did better when he came on against West Ham, but there was not much to do in that game for him, to be honest. So that is the area you'd imagine you want to focus on. The Quansah Trent section, despite him being a much better defender this season, Trent, I think that's the area where Quansah coming out to deal with the space that Trent's left. Not as comfortable with that as Kanate.
Hmm.
Kanate's engineered for that role, basically. So we'll see. But I think that there's that side, and there's some frailty. I still think there's some frailty on the left back side as well. So those would be the areas I imagine Liverpool fans are concerned about. But I mean, you've already spoken about what you think of Liverpool anyway this season. We didn't mention Grav because I think it would take us down another
We can
20
do a
minute
separate Grav episode one day.
20-minute rabbit hole. But yeah, I think just all that's left for me to do is thank you for talking to me about football this early in the year, as we have to sort of get our minds back into what our sides are going to do for the rest of the season. And yeah, thank you very much for sharing your opinion as usual, Carl.
Thank you for having me. I'd say good luck, but I don't really mean it.
There you go.